Good evening, everyone. Many of you know me. I'm Chris Ranciere, and I'm here tonight to be the moderator. I would like to introduce Kay Scaglione, our conductor. See
Hello.
who's sitting on the right. And John Nakamatsu, our pianist for this evening. Case, I'd like to begin with you because I know you haven't been to Albuquerque before. You've been to Santa Fe to conduct. So can you just tell the audience a little bit about your background and perhaps what inspired you to become a conductor? Was there a particular mentor or a special opportunity?
Well, I'm from Texas originally, which is like a full-fat version of New Mexico, I guess. So no, I grew up in Texas. I was a trombone player, so I grew up in the great public school system of Texas. I'm always so proud of our band program there, and so I got bit by the bug early on, and started studying scores and yeah, I don't even really remember making the decision to be a conductor. It happened so early on. I was taken to an opera because of a babysitter cancellation, and I fell in love with music instantly, and it's just ever since then that's what I've wanted to do.
That's awesome. All right, now, John, I would be remiss if I didn't have you just give a little tiny sample of your famous YouTube speech, which everyone talks about.
Oh gosh, okay. There was a speech on YouTube that I didn't know was being recorded, but with a cell phone was, and it took place at a piano competition where I was a jury member, and basically it was a speech. I really had no idea what to talk about until, of course, the night before the speech was to be delivered, and I got this brainstorm because a lot of the contestants who were eliminated at this competition were very angry. And these weren't just normal contestants. These people were amateurs. And amateurs generally above 40 and in completely other professions. And yet at this amateur event, they were still upset that they lost. And I think it brought up all these feelings of their past. So without remembering any of the specific quotes, the speech is about the many, 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 many times that I've lost. and fortunately, there was only one of those very, very many times in a competition that I won. And that really kind of launched my career as a pianist. But I think what people forget, especially when somebody wins a prize and then suddenly has a new life, that person probably lost about 1,000 times more than he or she has won.
You also have an interesting background in that you do not have a music degree. You have a degree in German and a degree in education. You were a teacher for several years, weren't you?
So I think we've established I'm completely not qualified to be here today. But yes, that's true. I do not have music degrees. I'm also a public school person, a Californian, and the product of an incredible private teacher who started me when I was 6 years old at my own behest, and actually went to the Van Cliburn competition with me when some 20 years later. So, and in a sense, she became a conservatory for me and sought out other people for me to work with in the various musical disciplines. And what that did was it actually freed me up to do other things in school. So I have literature and education degrees. To make ends meet, I was a high school German teacher for 6 years. It's where I met my wife, so I can't say that it's been all bad. But it certainly was a different life and a strange path to get to this evening. So yeah, I beg for your forgiveness.
Case, I can tell from rehearsals this week that The Barber is a very special piece to you. It's such a concise, well-conceptualized piece. Can you give your thoughts about it?
Well, Barber is perhaps my favorite American composer, and I say that advisedly, understanding that yes, Gershwin and Bernstein and many other. I mean, I know some people that think that Gershwin's the greatest melodist ever, but there is one of the great things about American music and being American is that we get our influences from everywhere. and a lot of the influences that we see on American music very often have to do with jazz and Negro spirituals. Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, which was a symphony about the New World, was very much about the black folk songs that Dvorak encountered when he came here. The interesting thing about Barber is that it is completely American in the most abstract sense. There's really nothing jazzy about it. It doesn't use very much folk song, although there are folk song sort of influences. And the thing that's so moving to me about Barber is that without being referential of anything else, it embodies this feeling of Americanness. And of course, a lot of you living here, understanding this wonderful tradition of Native Americans is all over this second essay of his. I mean, it starts with very peculiar orchestration with a solo flute and a bass drum and a tuba. It sounds like one of these ancient Native American instruments playing. It's from forever ago. And the piece is so concise. There's a very clear arc. It's hard to believe that it's only 10 minutes long because there's so much contained within it. You slowly climb this mountain, and then you finally arrive at the end with this wonderful, wonderful chord. I mean, it's one of the great American utterances. Thank you.
Now, I know that we have not performed the Saint-Saëns Second Piano Concerto here for quite a while, but I think the audience will be delighted because there's so much to offer in it, the various tunes from Bach to Offenbach, and it has a little bit of an interesting history behind it. Would you like to comment on that?
That was the criticism of it the first time. It starts with Bach and ends with Offenbach, so. But we're flipping it into a positive here, so that's a good thing now.
Well, I have to say, the cliche kind of rings true. When you hear the first about 30 seconds of the piece, you'll think, wow, it does sound like Liszt kind of improvising on a Bach tune. But it quickly goes away from that. And in fact, Saint-Saëns, it's interesting because in fact, all 5 of his concertos were written to show him off as a pianist. And I think the story in this case is that Anton Rubinstein, the very famous pianist himself, was coming to town to make his conducting debut, and Saint-Saëns, of course, wanted to make his Paris debut, I guess, as a pianist with Rubinstein. So he wrote this piece in 3 weeks. And not only did he write it in 3 weeks, but he had to perform it in 3 weeks. And the anecdotes are that the performance really wasn't that successful from a public standpoint, probably because he didn't have enough time to practice what he wrote. And you'll see why. I mean, there's a lot of piano in this piece. And it starts and finishes, and there's scarcely a break. But it is really to show off what I think the pianist can do. Nevertheless, I think the great part of this piece is the interaction between what the pianist does and the orchestra. And sometimes within these very heavy piano tilted works like this, you get a sense of maybe just the orchestra being overrun by the pianist. And I think the most successful collaborations, and one I think that we as a team strive for, is that it's a whole experience, and it's not just about the piano. And you'll see a lot of times that the piano is just accompanying. And some of the most interesting moments to me are when the piano really isn't in the forefront. Even though I might be very busy, I'm not doing the material that you're really supposed to be focusing on. And I think that's one of the unsung positives of this piece. It's how well integrated the piano is with the orchestra in many of the sections.
You will all thoroughly enjoy it, I guarantee it. The second half of the program is the monumental Rachmaninoff Second Symphony. And I love what Kay said at the first rehearsal to the orchestra. Do you remember before we even started?
No, I don't.
You said it's like bathing in chocolate.
Yes. Yes. Which, depending on how long that experience goes on, can be not, when you're in the middle of it, not as good as, it sounded at the onset. You're going to have a great experience, though, today of bathing in chocolate, so.
Well, the Barber was such a compact piece, whereas the Rachmaninoff is so expanded. Mm-hmm. And how do you think he keeps the momentum going? Is it through the tension?
Well, I mean, the thing that really saves Rachmaninoff, this is still one of his most popular works. There is an accessibility to Rachmaninoff's music. there's an old saying that about Brahms and Tchaikovsky. What is it? That Tchaikovsky isn't as good as he sounds, and Brahms is better than he sounds. Rachmaninoff sounds good, and it's also very good music. Those two things aren't always the same. Sometimes it sounds good, and it's not great music. This accessibility, the warmth of melodies, and it touches you. I mean, by this point, at the very beginning of the 20th century, I mean, the 20th century was 6 years old at this point. Mahler was getting ready to summarize all of Romanticism in tonality 4 years away. So the orchestral medium was sort of reaching a breaking point. The pieces were as long as they could be. They were getting to be as chromatic as they could be. And yeah, the experience is overwhelming and very, very heart on sleeve. And the trick in this piece, of course, is pacing yourself, because you can give so much to the point that it becomes meaningless. But I think you're going to enjoy this performance tonight.
I guess we should be thankful that his second piano concerto was so successful, because then he decided to try his hand at composition again with the symphony, which was not so successful the first time.
I can't imagine.
Well, now I think we should open this up to questions. Does anyone have, right here in the front row.
Yes. Could our guest please expand on each two modern composers that you feel?
Only two. Only two. We're supposed to expand. We're supposed to expand on. That's what I'm doing. We're supposed to expand on two modern composers that we like.
Well, I can talk about 2 or 3 that I'm doing this year, actually. One is the New York composer Lisa Bielava, who wrote a piece for a piano and drone. And it's very interesting, and you can do it in many different ways. But one of the interesting thing about working with a different medium or a living composer is that you can call this person and say, I don't know what you're doing. What does this all mean? And Lisa is the kind of person who is not only a very searching, kind of very intellectual and smart artist, but she is also one who is extremely open to interpretive ideas. And that's what we do as musicians. It's try to interpret what they notate. And sometimes it's very difficult. But again, it is no more difficult than even approaching music for which there is already a big performing tradition like Beethoven or Chopin or Brahms, etc. It's just that you can't contact these people. And so,
Which is helpful in my line of work.
That's true. And sometimes a better thing, yeah. But what I found, and I'm sure maybe you've had a similar experience, is that all the living composers that I've worked with have been so open to saying things like, well, I didn't think of it that way.
No, this is the most amazing thing.
That's great.
There's a story of Stravinsky. I'll get to the two composers in a second. I went to school at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and we were right across the street from the magnificent Cleveland Orchestra. And we think of this monumental, this person who really embodied the 20th century, like Igor Stravinsky, as such an exacting musical character. And John Mack, the principal oboe player, talks about they were doing maybe Petrushka, and there was this woodwind passage, and it wasn't clear in the part whether Stravinsky wanted him to play a half step or a whole step trill. He says, Maestro, what do you think? And Stravinsky looks at it and says, do what you think. So I think there's this real tendency to retroactively treat everything in the ink as gospel in a way that is really not realistic. I mean, everything in the ink can't be gospel because there's not enough information in the most detailed of composers to account for the sound that's going to happen, Two modern composers, it's so difficult for me. One who has been dead for only about 15 years is Ligeti, who you would know, who's made famous by 2001: A Space Odyssey. What I love about Ligeti is his ability, if you ever saw the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, whenever they're going through the infinity of space and there are these very kind of strange sounds, all made by an orchestra, by the way. It sounds electronic. His idea was, at this point of composition in his life, to take music and divorce melody and harmony and rhythm from the musical experience. The greatest example of this, I implore all of you to go to either Spotify or iTunes or something and to get his Atmosphere, Atmospheres, an 8-minute piece, an absolute gem. There's no melody, the orchestra's noodling and making these sounds. And when you look at the score, everybody was playing something else. I mean, if you ever see this performance live, the score is 3 feet tall because everybody's playing something completely different. The result, of course, he was inspired by electronic music but didn't like the idea of using electronics. So he made the orchestra, you think, my God, is that an orchestra making that sound? It's just, he's one of the incredible orchestrators, and in a way, I don't think we still haven't caught up with his innovation. He's not as popular as he will be. And the other one, who I think has to be one of my favorite living composers, either John Adams or Chris Rouse. John Adams, of course, has this accessibility thing that Rachmaninoff had. It is great music, it's innovative, it is new, but at the same time, it's tremendous music that's advancing the conversation. And I think apologies to all other composers, I think that Christopher Rouse is probably the most fluent speaker of the orchestral language that's alive now. When I was associate at the New York Philharmonic, we were lucky enough to have him as composer in residence for 2 years. So we would play a piece of his very regularly, maybe 2 or 3 times a month. The orchestra didn't like it so much because it's fiendishly difficult. So I told them, I promise you, it sounds really good. They're playing 1 million notes a second, and going, this is. But I would say those, yes.
Oh, another question here.
I had a question about, I think it was Goodwin, the composer. I can't find his music. I would love to get it. Could you talk about that composer and the piece for piano and clarinet?
So the gentleman is referencing a concert that I did actually in the area last weekend with my great friend and colleague John Manassi, the clarinetist. And we had a number of works written for us, and among which is this newer piece by Gordon Goodwin. Gordon Goodwin is actually more famous as a Hollywood movie composer. His music was, in The Incredibles. He won multiple awards for all of his film scoring. So those pieces, allow us to do something that we normally don't do, and that is to get into a medium kind of like film music. And for me, as a pianist, just practicing my Bach at home, it's a lot of fun. But it's a lot of work too, because you have to assume a different style of playing. And I'm not a trained jazz pianist. I'm very closeted when it comes to jazz and pop styles.
You have to be.
Yeah, because that is a completely different way of playing and a completely different way of conceptualizing music. But you get a little bit of it in these pieces. His music, I do think it's available online, although this piece probably is not because it is so new. And a lot of composers hold on to the rights for a while before they actually release it to the public. But it'll be out there one of these days, and I'm sure you can probably his publisher may be Warner Brothers, but I'm not completely sure. It'll get out there, I guarantee it.
Oh, I see a question back here. Woman in the red coat.
I love the Saint-Saëns concerto, but I've always found it curious, the orchestration in it. The orchestra will be playing full blast, but it just sounds sort of like it's wheezing sometimes, because there are no loud instruments in the fortes. I'm just curious whether any of you know what's going on there.
Is this my area? Is that? There's a very general way of composing in the 19th century for orchestra and for piano. There was a tendency a lot to have the orchestra doubling a lot of what's going on in the piano. As far as the orchestra wheezing, I have not had that experience in the Saint-Saëns. I actually think this piece is brilliantly written for balance. Of course, the worst example of balance in all of concertos is the Korngold Concerto for violin, which was written for Hollywood, But I think this actually works. This works very well. There's only maybe one passage in the first movement when they have fortissimo that we had to say, we're going to have to take some edge off there. But I find it quite well well orchestrated. I hope that we don't wheeze for you tonight. That's my sincere hope.
Oh, woman in the green dress, yes.
For Case, when you do a guest conducting thing, you come in to an orchestra that you may not be familiar with. How do you assess their ability and then decide how you're going to work the piece into a performance?
Well, the amazing and difficult thing about what we do is that there are no exact answers. I mean, even for conducting, I mean, the idea of teaching conducting has always been a strange thing for me, because any rule that you can come up with, I can give you 6 exceptions where it goes completely out the window. This is the same thing with the rehearsal process. It's human interaction. I mean, you don't prepare for a conversation for someone that you're going to meet at Starbucks, tomorrow. There's an organic thing that kind of that happens naturally, and it takes a moment to get used to each other. I mean, in the first rehearsal, I generally try to play the entire piece through and give them an opportunity to find their footing, to listen to one another and to get used to me and I get used to them. And then we just, they bring some of their tradition, I bring some of my tradition, and it's a conversation. We meet in the middle. And it's not like conductors show up and say, well, this is how I want it to be, because the sound is, you're working with a completely different thing, even with the same piece. This is what's mind-blowing. I did a lot of Prokofiev 5s last year, like 4 or 5 of them, and there are places that are always difficult, but the problems with different orchestras and what they brought to it, and it's not just one way. I mean, I also learn from them, so I always see it as a learning opportunity to have a collective 2,000 years of experience in front of me. And I may not say it out loud, but I steal ideas for myself and pawn them off as my own later. That's.
I think we have time for one more question. Eric, is that you? Oh, here comes the microphone.
Sorry. So I noticed when you were discussing the collaboration between the piano and the orchestra, there's a lot of you really think of yourselves as a team, and I see that a lot more with the two of you than with a number of the other people who have come and spoken with us at these lectures. And I was just wondering, how have you worked together before?
Go.
Yes, we have. We worked together at the Baltimore Symphony several years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years
Yeah,
ago.
I can't remember. We did Rhapsody in Blue.
Yeah.
A little different.
A little different, yeah. But it's an amazing thing, when you meet somebody that instantly you feel very comfortable on the stage, and you know it. I mean, for me, I know it within the first minute of the rehearsal if this is going to be something that I'm really going to just be able to relax into, or if this is something where I feel like I'm going to have to work at every little corner. It's great. I mean, this man is brilliant. You will see, you will hear, you will. Just wait. But for a pianist, it's especially important to have somebody up there you can trust, because so much of what we do is not even heard by some of the people in the orchestra, and a lot of times what they are doing I can't hear where I'm at either. So that we're all musically on the same page, and it is really funneled through one person. As individual as all of us are on the stage, there has to be one person that unifies the whole experience, and fortunately for this weekend we have that.
Well, I would say though, the idea though in the concerto is that it's funneling through you. I'm just kind of trying to get the current off of him. I mean, there is this very, particularly the way that weeks are constructed, this idea that the soloist and the conductor meet, and then the conductor conducts, and we try to, but really what we ought to be doing when we're accompanying concerti is to be supporting him. And from the very first moment that we talked about this piece, he has a concept, and that takes hold, and we try to support him as much as possible, because I think that instantly comes across when that does not happen.
Definitely, yeah, I agree.
We're going to have to bring this to a close so the orchestra can come out to warm up, but I would like to thank all of you for attending, and I hope you enjoy yourself this evening.
Thank you.